As a child, did you ever fear someone you were supposed to trust more than you would a stranger on the street? Maybe it was a sibling or a teacher or someone in your community. If you ever experienced a childhood trauma from someone who wasn't your parent or caregiver, this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Annie Wright, a licensed psychotherapist and an expert in childhood trauma recovery. Every bit of my work in the world, including today's episode, is designed to support those who come from childhood trauma backgrounds to have the best adulthood possible, no matter where they started in life. I'm so glad you're here, and I want to welcome you here today. If you've ever experienced childhood trauma or had questions about the impacts about how your childhood trauma may have impacted you in adulthood, I encourage you to subscribe to this YouTube channel and sign up for my newsletter in the show notes below. And now, as part of helping you have the best adulthood possible, despite how you may have started out in life, we're going to explore today's topic, relational trauma, beyond caregivers to siblings and communities. In this episode, we'll cover the following: why we need to expand the scope of relational trauma, what even are relational trauma experiences beyond caregivers, and so much more. Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to say that I truly hope that what I share here can be of support to you. And very importantly, I want you to remember something else. No matter where you're starting from, change is possible. So, to begin, let me explain that childhood trauma is a concept that has traditionally been understood in the context of the abuse and neglect perpetrated by a child's primary caregivers. However, this narrow definition, in my personal and professional opinion, often fails to capture the full spectrum of traumatic experiences that can profoundly impact an individual's mental health and well-being. As a therapist specializing in childhood trauma recovery, I've encountered many individuals whose traumatic experiences were not recognized because their abusers were siblings or members of their community, and their caregivers, frankly, did nothing to intervene when that was the case. In these situations, these folks wouldn't see themselves and their experiences in quote-unquote traditional definitions of childhood trauma. To address this gap, and because my own understanding of trauma has deepened over time, I've developed what I hope is a more inclusive definition of relational trauma. I'll share that with you now. Relational trauma is the kind of trauma that results over the course of time in the context of a power imbalanced and dysfunctional relationship, usually between a caregiver and a child, but also between a child and systems or communities, that results in a host of complex and lingering biopsychosocial impacts for the individual who subjectively endured the trauma and who was overwhelmed by the experience. Look, I've said this dozens of times before, but in my clinical experience and in my lived experience, I found that many individuals struggle to see themselves in the classic definitions of childhood trauma. Often this is because the abusers were not their parents, but rather siblings, teachers, or community leaders. And quite frankly, their parents failed to protect them in these cases. This broader understanding of relational trauma, I think, is really crucial for validating the experiences, the relational trauma experiences of those who endured abuse in those less recognized contexts. So what are some of these less recognized contexts? Let's flesh them out a little bit more. Here are a few examples of relational trauma experiences that go beyond caregivers as we've sort of traditionally defined it. Example number one, boarding school teacher trauma. I want to share with you a quote, okay? The experience of being sent away to boarding school can be deeply traumatic for many children. The lack of parental warmth and the harsh disciplinary regimes often found in these institutions can lead to long-term emotional and psychological difficulties. This is a quote by McGuffin, and it's from a resource called The Impact of Boarding School on Attachment and Later Relationships. In these scenarios, parents often dismissive of their child's complaints, may insist that their child endures the abuse for the sake of a prestigious education. This lack of parental intervention exacerbates the relational trauma experience, leaving the child feeling isolated and unsupported. Now, before you come at me and tell me that this is far-fetched, that nobody goes to boarding schools anymore, that this is a relic of the past, I don't think you need to look much further than examples in the books of Roald Dahl, C.S. Lewis, and J.K. Rowling for pop culture examples reflecting this pattern that is likely alive and well today beyond the 1950s and the halls of Hogwarts. In other words, it's not just fiction anymore. Fiction represents it, but it's still happening out in the world today. Okay, another example of a relational trauma experience that extends beyond caregivers being the abusers: sibling abuse. I want to share a quote with you. The impact of sibling abuse can be profound, often leading to psychological issues such as anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. It's a serious problem that deserves more attention from both researchers and clinicians. This is a quote from Sibling Abuse: Hidden Physical, Emotional, and Sexual Trauma. Look, sibling abuse is another often overlooked form of relational trauma. An older sibling might incite fear in their younger siblings by frequently threatening harm, humiliation, or abandonment, using intimidation to control and manipulate, among other things. Parents may see the older sibling as simply being strict or protective, failing to recognize the severe emotional and psychological harm being inflicted on the younger child. Okay, if you're a Stranger Things fan like I am, the chilling relationship between Billy Hargrove and his stepsister Max Mayfield includes emotional and physical abuse. Always an example I share when I need to illustrate sibling abuse or another relational trauma experience that doesn't just happen with parents. Another relational trauma experience beyond caregivers: church trauma. Let me share another quote that I think illustrates the impacts of this. Religious trauma syndrome, RTS, is a condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. It can result in depression, anxiety, grief, and difficulty in relationships. This is a quote from a resource called Leaving the Fold, a guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion. So I'll share that in some cases, religious and spiritual institutions can be sources of significant trauma. I've experienced this throughout my professional career. For example, a church that shames and ostracizes a child for questioning its beliefs can inflict deep psychological wounds. If parents support the church's actions and refuse to protect their child, citing religious justifications, the child's trauma is compounded by a profound sense of betrayal and abandonment. For many, many examples of this kind of church trauma, this kind of church relational trauma, look no further than the veritable library of documentaries Netflix has that illustrates church trauma. A couple titles: The Keepers, Wild Wild Country, Leah Remini, Scientology and the Aftermath, The Family, Explained Cults, Murder Among the Mormons, and Holy Hell. Oh, and personally, I always lean on The Handmaid's Tale as another example of trauma that can spring from cult-like religions. Again, some of this is fiction, a lot of this is documentary. So one more example of a relational trauma experience that can happen beyond parents and caregivers: school-based bullying trauma. I want to share with you a quote about this. The impacts of bullying are profound and enduring. Victims of bullying often experience higher rates of mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, which can persist well into adulthood. This is a quote from a resource called Effective Strategies for Preventing Bullying in Schools. So I want you to imagine a scenario where a child is repeatedly, persistently, and painfully bullied by peers at school. The bullying might cause physical assaults, verbal harassment, and social exclusion. Despite the child's repeated reports to teachers and school administrators, the school fails to take effective action to stop the bullying. Instead, the administration downplays the incidents both to the child and to the parents, labeling them as typical childhood conflicts or something like that. The child's parents, trusting the school's authority and wanting to avoid conflict, tell their child to toughen up and ignore the bullies. This lack of intervention and support from both the school and the parents leads to the child feeling isolated, helpless, and unsafe. A very grim and extreme pop culture portrayal of the damage of school-based bullying can be seen in Stephen King's very chilling phenomenon, Carrie, the book and the movie. So in each of these four examples of relational trauma experiences that happen when it's not just the parents as abusers, I'd really be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that parents and guardians still do play a crucial role in these relational trauma experiences. Even if they're not the direct perpetrators of the abuse, their failure to intervene renders them complicit. This complicity raises significant clinical questions. If parents are unaware of the abuse, it suggests a lack of attentiveness and emotional attunement, which are essential for healthy child development. So we would question what was going on in the family system that led them to not know that that was going on in the first place. And then certainly we would hold them complicit if they knew and did not intervene to support the trauma being inflicted on their child. So in that case, if they are aware but choose not to act, it reflects a deeply disturbing neglect of their protective role, further contributing to the child's trauma, right? Of course. I'll be discussing a lot more in future pieces about parental guardian complicity, but for now and for the sake of this episode, recognizing that trauma can be inflicted by siblings, teachers, and community and spiritual leaders, and that parental complicity plays a significant and damaging role, all this allows us to have a more comprehensive view, both of relational trauma experiences and really the validation of those experiences. Hopefully, by sharing this information about what other sources of relational trauma might be, you may have seen yourself and your experience more clearly. And now I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Did you resonate with today's episode? Did you resonate with the fact that your own relational trauma happened at the hands of siblings or church or spiritual leaders or even teachers or coaches at boarding schools or in schools? If so, if you feel comfortable and if you feel so inclined, I'd love to invite you to leave a comment below, sharing your story, sharing your experience. When you do that, you never know who on the other side of the world might read your comment and resonate with your story and feel less alone. Finally, if you're still not sure if this content applies to you, if you're still not sure if you come from a childhood trauma history or deal with its impacts in adulthood, I would invite you to take my signature quiz. Do I come from a childhood trauma background? It's a 5-minute, 25-question quiz I created that can be incredibly illuminating and point you in the direction of a wide variety of resources that can be of further and immediate help to you. Plus, when you take the quiz, you'll be added to my mailing list where you'll receive twice-a-month letters from me sharing original, high-quality pieces with accompanying YouTube videos and audios you can stream, all of it devoted to the topic of relational trauma recovery, and where I share more about me as a person, my life, and how I'm journeying through my own childhood trauma recovery and general adulthood. My newsletters are the only place where I share intimate glimpses into my life, including photos and the resources that are supporting me, the things I've discovered that delight me, words that are uplifting me, the practices that nourish me, and more. So please be sure to sign up for my mailing list whether or not you want to take the quiz. I'll link to both of these things in the show notes below. Finally, thank you so much for listening to me today. I truly hope that even a small part of what I shared today felt helpful to you. If you found value in this information and would like to stay connected with my latest content, please consider giving the episode a like. It helps more than you know. Also, subscribing to my channel and turning on the notification bell ensures you're always up to date with my newest episodes. I appreciate your support and look forward to continuing this journey with you. So thank you. And until next time, please take such good care of yourself. You're so worth it.